where I'm going to start where we were finished at the last meeting, which was in Judges 7. And we looked at a dream here. The focus of this message is going to be in relation to dreams, but we will look at a couple of other things as well. And just before we go into that, I'll just read a little from Prophet John Paul Jackson's book, which I mentioned before. So we're looking specifically at courage dreams today. And you might not have ever thought of that category of dream before, but I'm pretty confident that you would have had courage dreams. And courage dreams are given to build you up and strengthen your faith. These dreams are often filled with vibrant colors and leave you feeling that God is with you and you are able to overcome your circumstances. So when you wake up from a dream like this, a courage dream, there's a definite impact on your emotions. You might have been feeling down. Even as I'm saying this, I'm reminded of not the specifics of the dream, but times where I've gone to bed feeling down, and I'll have one of these dreams and it will just lift me up. It'll encourage me. And this is one of the reasons why dreams are so important, not only an opportunity for God to speak, but it also changes us, can impact our emotions. So we're going to be looking at a dream that we looked at last time. And what the focus that I gave last time was on whether this dream was a warning dream or a prophetic dream, or like a foretelling dream, as I like to call them. And so you know the story of Gideon. So God called him to cast off the yoke of the Midianites who were oppressing the Israelites. And he went through this process. There was initially a lot of people who came there, and 22,000 people were left, were encouraged to go home. If you're fearful and trembling, Gideon said you could go home. And all this was because God didn't want the number of people to be so large that the Israelites would say, oh, we did this by our own strength. And this is, again, commending the grace of God, relying on God's grace. So it's not actually our strength that does things, it's God doing that. And he did that by reducing the number of people. They had 22,000 people left, and then the people who are lapping with their tongues, different things that God did so that they would be reduced in number. And God gave a final encouragement to Gideon when he said, from verse 9, this is Judges 7, verse 9, the same night the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. So this was an instruction of God, and sometimes we'll know what God said to us, but we will be a little bit fearful, apprehensive. I spoke before about being fearful of rejection in relation to sharing the gospel. That's one of the things I struggle with at times. But and it says here, but if you are afraid to go down and then go down and attack them, go down to the camp with Purah your servant. So that's not with your whole the army of people, the 300 with you. Just go down with your servant, and you will hear what they say, and afterwards your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. So this is something that God is going to use to encourage Gideon. And so he went down with Purah his servant to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance. And their camels were without number, as the sand is on the seashore. When Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. So we have this situation. God's told Gideon to go down to the camp and you'll find something encouraging. So he goes down to the camp, and there's one person here from the camp telling another his dream. It was interesting. I wonder whether Gideon was experiencing God moving him in a certain direction, that he would happen to go down where those two people were. This is the amazing providence of God, that all these circumstances were lining up. The decisions that Gideon made to take that walk down to where that camp was, the place where he was hiding obviously wasn't visible to them, so he was hiding somewhere, and he had to be in earshot of those people as well. This is the amazing providence of God. So when Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. He said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian and came to the tent and struck it, and that it fell and turned upside down. So the tent lay flat. And the comrade answered. So we have one person telling his dream, and we have this other person interpreting it. And what's interesting, I think, in those days, people were a bit more spiritual than what we are today. And there was, I guess, a certain element of superstition that went with that, and the worship of false gods in some areas, and obviously with these people as well. But they were more spiritually tuned in. We were very blessed by the Renaissance and by the Reformation that occurred. And but before that time, people were, if the crops had failed, they'd believe that, they made that happened because the gods weren't happy with them. And so the essence of that is that no, it's not the gods, it's this rain pattern, whatever it might be that's going on here. And so there was a rationality that came out of that as well. There's wonderful blessings that came from it. We had art, we had like the scientific method, we had all this sort of thing that's happening as a result of that. But what happened was, and this was happening at the same time with the church, where there was a lot of problems in the church. There were what was called indulgences, where people were paying money to get for notes of forgiveness, and there was opulence in the church, where the people weren't caring about the like the priests and so on weren't caring about the general public. There was competition going on between different different popes at the time, and different people vying for position. So there was a lot that was going wrong in the church, and one of the things that the Reformation did was say, we don't earn God's favor. It's by grace alone, by faith alone, by Christ alone. And I think there was this element of that which is very important. That was very important that we had that. But there was also this aspect where some of the spiritual connection, I believe, was lost. But we still have that today, I believe, in animistic, I don't know if that's the right, animist cultures, where there's this history of that, and both the good and the bad, and a lot of the bad, where people have worshipped foreign gods, and there's a fear of those gods. But there is this more awareness of that spiritual connection. And another thing that is coming to mind is when the disciples were trying to drive out a demon, and the boy, when Jesus came, fell down and was rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And if we saw that today, we'd point to that and say, oh, that's epilepsy. And because of the mindset that we have that has been conditioned by those things, we don't think about the spiritual connection. I've done this as well. I'm not being well, I think, I'll go to the doctor, rather than seeking God first. And that's that awareness of the spiritual realm. So I'd encourage us, I guess, to be more aware of that, of those spiritual dynamics, and particularly, in relation to dreams. I believe that's part of why we've lost some of that. As you look at in Joseph's dreams as well, where his parents and his brothers, in some ways the dream was a bit obvious, but there was something, for example, where Joseph said the sun and the moon and the stars were bowing down to him, and the father said, well, will we really be bowing to you? So the sun and the moon referred to the father and the mother. which we might not necessarily interpret dreams that way today. But there was this, I believe, a greater awareness of the spiritual realm. And so that's one of the blessings that we have as well when we mix with other cultures where there has been this animist path where people have, and it's often in developing countries, where people have had that experience. But today, in the Western culture, it's very rationalistic. It's very based on logic. A lot of things, and the scientific method, which has been a wonderful blessing, and I wouldn't say anything against that, but it can train our mind to think a certain way. So let's think outside the rational and go into the spiritual side of things as well. So here we have this cake of bread that's tumbling into the camp, and it came and struck the tent, and so that it fell. And I guess that this is maybe obvious in some respects, in that there was something that was going to happen in that camp that was going to destroy them. But there's nothing in that dream that would say, oh, this is Gideon that's coming. But the comrade answered, this is none other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. So this was his interpretation of that. And I spoke last time about the why was it a barley bread, and the reason for that is that in those days, rich people ate wheat bread and poor people ate barley bread. So it symbolized something that was poor, something that was weak, something that was insignificant. And yet it toppled the whole camp down. Even if you think of like a loaf of bread, there's no way. It's one of the things to look for in dreams as well, where you have something that's not logical for a loaf of bread to knock down a tent. And so this was the message of that dream. And so I looked last week as well. Is this the difference between a warning dream and a prophetic dream? So you can have this sort of thing in a warning dream. And that's why I was highlighting last time the importance of understanding the difference between those two, because a warning dream is something that is depicted and you pray against what you see, and then it won't happen. It stops it from happening, because God gives you that so that there will be the awareness of it, and there'll also be you'll be prompted to take intervention. That's why it's important to pray after dreams. And sometimes if you don't understand the symbols in the dream, you can pray according to the symbols that, that this wouldn't happen. So we have this barley bread coming in. And in this case, this was a prophetic dream, or what I like to call a foretelling dream. So nothing that they would have done, they could have prayed to their gods, or maybe even prayed to the Lord, but it wouldn't stop that from happening. And there's one dream I've had that was like that. And I did pray at the time and didn't stop it from happening. But so it's very important to distinguish between those warning dreams and the prophetic dreams. Because sometimes if you have a warning dream, you can start getting fearful and think that that's a prophetic dream, that this is going to happen. So it's very important to distinguish. That's why this teaching on dream categories is very, very important. I'd encourage you to be working on that, thinking about that. So what's interesting is that this dream satisfied two different categories. So it was a prophetic dream to the people who had it, and it was an encouraging dream, or a courage dream, to Gideon, because he came down there, he heard what they were saying, and he found courage in that. So it says in verse 15, as soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped, and he returned to the camp and said, arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. So he didn't see that host of people like locusts, the camels without number. He saw what God was calling him to do, and what God had done, given them into his hand. So that's one example of a courage dream. So another one that we're going to look at, and it's mentioned in Prophet John Paul Jackson's book, is from Genesis 31. Genesis 31. I'll be highlighting a couple of other things from the scripture as well in relation to God speaking. So reading from verse 1. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. So you may remember the story here. So Jacob went to Laban, his uncle, and Jacob loved Rachel, and Laban said, okay, you work for me, I think it was 7 years, and I'll give you Rachel. And Jacob worked his 7 years like it was a day. And who should he wake up with on the wedding night than Leah, Rachel's older sister? So Laban swindled him in a way and gave him his older the older daughter. And Jacob said, what have you done? Why have you done this? He said, and Laban said, it's because it's not our culture, it's not our habit to give the younger daughter first. The older one has to be married first. So then Jacob had to work another 7 years. And then when he was in Laban's service, what were his wages going to be? And it was the speckled lambs and goats and so on. And so what happened was that that God showed. I'll read on. So this is kind of a summary after all that has happened. And God said, verse 2, and Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. So this is a change in the attitude of Laban towards Jacob, I guess because of all this is going on. But one thing I want to highlight here, it's something that I've noticed as well. I mentioned that God speaks through circumstances. And what you will sometimes find, you'll be in a situation where things have been going well, but then suddenly the person in authority in that situation has a change of heart towards you, and you think, what have I done? Why is this changing? And usually that's a sign that God is about to move you on. God is about to move you on. And there can be other circumstances. For example, remember when Elijah was drinking from the brook and being fed by ravens? Then the brook dried up. So that was a sign for him to move on. Then God spoke to him. And we have a similar thing happening here. Jacob knows that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. Verse 3, then the Lord said to Jacob, so circumstance has changed. So I believe God was preparing Jacob to hear from him about this. And so I believe there's a number of people listening today who you're in some situation. It might not be today, it might be as you listen to this recorded message in the future. And you're just aware, you think, why is this situation changing here? Why is this person no longer favorable towards me? And the reason is because God is about to move you somewhere else. So don't be discouraged. Don't feel like it's because of something that you've done. I believe it is God preparing you for a move. Just as an eagle stirs up its nest so that the young get uncomfortable, they're ready to take flight. Then Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will be with you. Very simple statement and very direct. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude towards me is not what it was before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. Not one time, not 2 times, 10 times. That sounds like the visa rules to get into Australia. They just keep changing all the time, but God will enable you. And whatever country that you're wanting to go to, whatever place that God has put on your heart, even though the rules change, God will have his way and enable you. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to streaked young. So God has taken away from your father's livestock and has given them to me in the breeding season once. So here we get to the dream here now from verse 10. In the breeding season, so there's often a timing with dreams as well. So there'll be things that are going on in your day, perhaps your week, and the dream will relate to those things. So when you are considering a dream and wanting to interpret a dream, please think about what happened that day and even in the recent past as well, and also the day after the dream. Just think about things that are happening in your day and whether that dream might apply to those, because that is often the case. In the breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and I saw that the male goats were mating the flock, the male goats with the flock were mating streaked, speckled, or spotted. And the angel of God, so he's had a dream and God then spoke to him in the dream. So this can sometimes happen. It's happened to me, not necessarily maybe as clear as the angel of the Lord appearing, but I will sometimes hear words, I'll hear a phrase, I'll hear something. So seeing something in a dream, and this is where it's important to be able to learn to put all those things together. And sometimes I wake up after a dream and I'll have a vision as I'm waking up. And I encourage you to just be sensitive to that and be looking to that as well. Because sometimes the things that you see when you're waking up, it relates to what you've just dreamt about. Then the angel of the Lord said to me in a dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. So there's a dialogue. I don't think I've ever had this dialogue with God in a dream, but here, this is what's happening. Here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. So imagine how Laban felt. He's under this person and constrained in order, because he has to be there to win or to be able to marry this woman that he's desiring to marry, but he's stuck in this situation. And I believe that there's people listening today, you're stuck in a situation as well where you have to be there in order to complete something, in order for something that maybe God's spoken to you to achieve, or something, for example, might be finishing studies, it might be finishing a project with some people that you're working with who are very, very difficult to work with. And God is seeing that. God is saying that I'm seeing what's going on. I'm seeing how these people are treating you. But God is going to vindicate you. And something that's just coming to mind is that with Gideon, those people who were his enemy said something to encourage him. And I believe there's people listening. Whenever you're listening to this, you're going to hear the enemy encouraging you. People who have been your enemies and maybe will continue to be the enemies, without knowing it, will say something that you find encouraging. So I'd encourage you to be looking and listening for that to happen as well, because this we saw from Judges how God did that with those enemies. But here in this dream, God is speaking to Jacob directly. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats are mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, and spotted. For I've seen all that Laban has doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. So imagine how Jacob felt experiencing that level of injustice, where the rules were constantly changing because Laban was trying to subjugate Jacob, trying to make the most of him as a helper in that situation and pay him the least wages. This is that scheming trick, that conniving thing that was part of this family line. And we see it a bit with a manipulative thing as well going on. So we even see that with Jacob later, remember, with Esau, where he pretended to be Esau and came to his father and got Esau's blessing. So that was an element in that family line. So, but God was saying He's seen all that, and God turned that situation around. So what that enemy was meaning for evil, God did and used for good in this situation, and to bring a blessing to Jacob and to bring him a great deal of possessions of sheep and goats and so on. So he would have been feeling very discouraged by all that, but this dream would have encouraged him. It's a courage dream. It's an example of a courage dream. And I'll just give another one as well. It's mentioned in this book, which I spoke of before. And this dream was taken from another one of John Paul Jackson's books, Understanding Dreams and Vision. It was from his course. And some of the meaning has been added in parentheses. So this is a woman, or somebody who's thinking about selling their house. And this is what I was saying before in one of the previous meetings. There's some things that the Bible doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you to sell your house. It doesn't tell you to move out. It doesn't tell you who to marry and so on. So we need to hear from God for those kind of things. In my dream, a woman named Anne, and Anne means grace, came to my door. So a door is a symbol of opportunity. It's a symbol of choice. They can choose whether you want to open that door or not. It's a symbol of transition when you go through to another place. So this person came to the door and handed the person who was having the dream a bouquet of flowers. So I assume that this was a woman, because a man is probably not going to be so moved by a bouquet of flowers. And that symbolized the Lord's presence and blessing. The Lord's presence and blessing. They are probably the most beautiful flowers I'd ever seen. This is the person narrating the dream. I was stunned and could not figure out why she had given these to me. And this is another example of speaking about grace before, the grace of God coming. So it's interesting, this dream, there's nothing in this dream about selling the house. This is why we need to be discerning of dreams, and we need the help of the Holy Spirit to interpret them. So this dream is, John Paul Jackson says, primarily a courage dream, but it can also be considered a direction dream. So this person who had this dream was overwhelmed by the goodness of God. And you can imagine how they woke up after this. They would have been very encouraged and thinking, wow, God is good. And so when she'd been feeling uncertain, not knowing what to do, so this door was saying yes, by the opening of the door, by the gift of the flowers, the Lord's presence and blessing. God is blessing that decision to sell the house. So this was also can be considered a direction dream, as I mentioned. So often a dream won't necessarily be just one category. There can be a couple of categories, like that one that we looked at in Judges. For the people, the Midianites, that was a prophetic dream. And for Gideon, that was a courage dream. So just some common things that you find in those ones. It might be an area of weakness, that something that you perceive to be weak in your life. God wants to bring courage to that area. And they often occur after you've been pressed into the Lord, or concerning a decision as well. You're not sure about it, like that example that we gave. And in the dream, something that causes fear normally is accomplished without the fear. That's something that's common to these dreams. So you might be afraid to volunteer for a new project at work. You might be afraid to choose a subject to study that is difficult. You might be afraid to speak. You're given an opportunity to speak in some situation. And then you may have a dream with you speaking confidently. You might have a dream with you passing that subject if it's one that's where you're afraid to take on that. And there can, as mentioned before, there can often be a connection between the courage dreams and also the direction dreams. So there can be both categories. After waking, you may feel a confirmation in your spirit about taking a chance on something that you've been praying about. God will give you a courage dream to provide the momentum you need to move forward in your destiny. It's one of the reasons why these dreams are so important. So that where you may be stagnating, where you may be procrastinating, struggling with a decision, this can be something that's very helpful. So I encourage you to maybe, even as I've been sharing these things, reflect on some of the dreams that you've had where you felt good after the dream, you felt encouraged, built up. So that was an example of a courage dream. And that is why as well that it's helpful to understand that category of dream. So when you have that dream, you think, oh, this is a courage dream. Okay. And once you establish that category, then you can go on to interpreting it a bit more. Like, for example, that lady who had the dream of the person knocking on her door, she identified that as a courage dream. Then she could think about, oh, what's God giving me courage to do? And then I mentioned a lot of dreams relate to circumstances in our lives, things that have been happening. So she could look and realize, okay, I've been seeking God about selling this house. I believe that dream relates to it. God's giving me courage to do that. And then you understand a bit more. You can then interpret the dream a bit more accurately. So that's when you see, okay, that door is then this door of opportunity. Notice it was the door of her house as well that was opening. So there, whilst it's not explicitly mentioned there, I believe that was the door of her house and an indication of that blessing coming into that house through the sale of it. So please think about this kind of dream as well, and be encouraged by them as you, I guess, understand it and can interpret those. We're going to, well, just before we have some prayer for healing, I'll be praying for anyone who is sick. Please, you might want to just put that in the chat if there's area of your life where you need healing, or something where you're in pain in part of your body. Please have that ready there, and I'll be able to pray for healing for you. But before we do that, I'd just like to reach out to anyone who maybe